So, sorry, this next section is on assessment. And we have three speakers joining us today as a panel session. And I prepared a few questions, but we're joined today by John Laird from Education Scotland, HMI Inspectorate. Is your name changing?
At some point, yes. You don't know what to do yet.
Graeme Clark, thank you, from SQA. And you're currently head of...
I used to be head of digital assessment services, but I'm now supporting the replacement reform agenda.
Right.
Working with SQA as to be something else, who knows what, and there's a kind of name bingo that can no doubt go out for that. And the reformed Education Scotland stroke HMI stroke whatever else is part of it. So.
A lot of new acronyms for me to learn in the future, I suspect. And Joe, thanks for joining us today from City of Glasgow College.
Hi there, head of new ventures at City of Glasgow College, but steeped in all of this landscape and interesting to see how we move forward with AI as well.
Absolutely, and I was delighted to be at your event the other week with Donald Clark speaking on AI, which was an excellent session, which is recorded and available, and I'm sure we'll push a link to those interested because it's worth watching. Hear Donald talk about AI, but we're here to talk about assessment, and I've prepared a few questions, and after which we'll just open it up to the audience, just for your general opinions. Really, assessment has been the topic that has taken over the headlines. What students will do with the technology that has been placed in front of them, and how do we as educators react to that? Now, there'll be no silver bullets appearing today, I suspect, but maybe some opinions to be shared. So I suppose, generally, from what you know of the AI on offer, a question for you individually, and I'll start with you, Joe, since you're in the college there. What do you think the impact of AI, tools like ChatGPT, will have on assessment practice?
I think there's two things. I think first of all, I think there's a naivety in the whole system that while ChatGPT has arrived and is creating all the headlines, I think for a number of years, lots of students have been using AI one way or another, and teaching staff haven't really been aware of it. And I think actually teaching staff have been using AI a lot as well, and they probably haven't been aware of it. I think AI has got enormous potential in how we accelerate learning, how we help learners. I mean, basically all of the things that we always dream of getting more information and knowledge and all the skills out to learners faster. AI can do all of that, but we have to change how we assess. And I'll share a wee paper, a wee bit of advice that I'm offering around or pushing around City of Glasgow College's draft, and I've pushed out a bit wider. The days of asking, I know that you ever did, but the days of asking the same old question of the same group of students every year, which I think perhaps mainly that might be impactful in social sciencey kind of subjects, but I think it goes on in computing and all kinds of areas too, that you just think, well, let's just ask them that same question again. SQA can sometimes be guilty of that as well because of the way assessment instruments are approved and the way colleges go to SQA to seek approval for assessment interests in assessment instruments. But if we're asking the same question year in, year out, then AI is going to gobble that up, and we do need to think about different ways of assessing. So there you are, that's my tuppence worth. And I'll share a wee paper which is about how we should be getting students to use AI, how we should be promoting it, and how students should reference AI when they use it. So they're not doing it on the fly. They are being upfront about when they use AI, and I think that's the bit of changing how we use AI, how students reference their use of AI, and really encouraging all learners to start using AI. And again, I suppose final caveat, I've heard ridiculous stuff about I think Oxford or Cambridge said at one point, we're going to stop AI being used. And again, that's the kind of let's block Google, let's stop learners using mobile phones nonsense that's happened in the past. Google and Microsoft, if you've listened to your listen to your media in the last couple of days, they're embedding AI in their tools. So there is absolutely no way MD can block learners using AI. We need to embrace this, folks. Yeah, sharp at that.
Thanks for that. John, what would you say?
Well, I think the problems behind AI, the things that we see as problems have always been there. The idea that students use source material and bring it into their answers is actually something we encourage. So in a way, the problem's not new, the convenience is new. And I think we also need to reflect on the fact, as we heard this morning, that the material that you get through ChatGPT and the others is, I'm going to describe it broadly as like Wikipedia. Fairly good, but you know, there will be problems with it. So the idea of it overwhelming assessment, I don't think is a reality. I think there are pluses in the long term. I think there are two things around it that strike me as useful. One is it may encourage staff to reflect more on authentic assessment. Because people who weld, who will do your hair, I understand people do hair now, who will bake, who will cook, who will do all the craft things, very rarely in their working life will they ever deal with a problem by writing an essay. This is only an academic stream. And I think the move to more authentic, and I mean that in both senses, one is generated by the student, but secondly, related to their working life. I think the ChatGPT difficulty will encourage us to make assessment more valid, reliable, and authentic. So in the longer term, those tools, I think, will push us in a healthier direction. But I also think that the potential of it for adaptive assessment, so looking at the levels that students work at, that they write at, so you may be able to pose a series of questions that respond to the quality of the answer using AI. So it may, in fact, encourage us to be able to assess in a shorter period of time and with a deal more rigor. So in the long term, those AI tools, I think, push us in a healthy direction. In the short term, of course, we have the problem, the very short-term problem of authenticating student work. But we've always had it. We had it before, turned it in. You know, it's been around, and I think people need to be pragmatic about how they assess to make sure they have confidence in the validity and the authenticity of the material.
Okay. Thank you. Graeme.
Yeah, can you?
SQA, I've heard they do things with assessment. What do you think ChatGPT means to SQA?
Right, I won't answer the one about what means SQA. We're getting replaced in 18 months anyway, so we'll hold on to that word and find another use for those three letters at some point after autumn 24. I guess more generally, I have some things around just generally around assessment, I think, which apply to SQA, because the fact is that so Joe is right, send something to SQA to get approved, and what we do is we fire it back out to a colleague who'll be probably in the college just down the road, who will decide that, send it back to us, and we'll send Joe and say, Joe, here it is, here's approved. So actually we become a facilitator of the college marking its own homework, effectively the sector marking its own practice. I think fundamentally there's some issues around assessment. And if I look at summative particularly, I think that the assessment models we haven't changed in 500 years. And we've indoctrinated all our human people to believe that that's the only way you can do it. And although we say revolutionary technology, I'm a technology person, most of it is globally, and this is a global issue, is conversion. Most of it is conversion. Even the COVID models were now a virtual, no. What he did was just didn't change anything apart from just move it somewhere else. And some of that elastic has now stretched back post-COVID. We're now back to the good old days. And you hear it from all of us. I think there's some honest thing about AI is, to be honest, is an enhanced version of technology that's been around for years. One of my colleagues did a master's in AI 25 years ago. The principle of using technology to enhance, I think, is a really good one. I think there's other things we need to have an honest reflection that humans are unreliable, inconsistent, subjective. They get tired. They make bad decisions, not reliably. And the problem is our whole education system's based on that. And I had to laugh at the fact that we want our, this notion that, and I think maybe it's naivety in the system that believes that when a teacher gives you feedback, they're giving you the most authentic result and feedback. Sorry, how did you work that out? Because actually, if you look at the accuracy of marking generally, I would go to a computer every time. I was listening to a company in the States who use 1 billion pieces of evidence to make the judgment, can automatically mark an essay in 100,000th of a second. And the reliability of marking against human marking is 30% more than humans. But interestingly, at some point, when they get a result, they want a human to give them it, as if somehow it makes you special and more valid. So I think there's a cultural thing in all of this. And actually, this whole idea of AI, I think for me, other things will come. For me, this is about disruption. Because the interesting about education reform in Scotland, and to be honest, it's a global issue again, education reform in all countries starts with the premise that we want to put the learner at the centre, but there are some fixed things. And all the things that are fixed are all the delivery institutions, all the employees who work for those delivery institutions, the curriculum, the model, the progression. So actually, we fix 90% of everything, and then we say we're going to transform the other 10%. And the problem with that authentic, so like John said, the authentic assessment model is fundamentally say if we're interested in learners being at the centre, then things like AI are about giving them ownership. If you go to a college or university, we spend all our time wanting learners to take ownership. But we say you can have ownership, but you'll have to attend between 9 and 4, Monday to Friday, and half day on a Friday. And we don't do that then, and we only have that available then. And actually, there's not much ownership. And I think the thing about AI for me is it allows people to say, actually, I'm not a technology, it's not the only thing. It's about ownership and saying, you can learn stuff without us. You know, the interesting about modern languages, and there's something in Scotland, and again, it's a global issue, maybe not in China, because they're the biggest English-speaking country in the world. And probably even more so, and America will become a Spanish-speaking country in the next 10 years. But the reality is that if you look at the growth of self-learning apps for languages, why would you be worried about lack of modern languages and skills? Well, I'm not worried about that. The reality is languages become a functional tool to enable people to communicate effectively in that way. They might not be able to write a 1,000-page book on some aspect of Spanish, but who particularly cares? If I was really honest in that way, for a learner, most of them, they need it functional and usable. And for me, AI, as long with other tools, becomes something that supports the individual learner. I was reflecting just finally, one of my friends was saying their daughter learned to play the violin in lockdown in a week on YouTube. Yeah, in the school she goes, there's no music teacher, by the way. Hey, who needs them? So she actually learned to play the violin, play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star in a week, and she said, oh, it's quite an easy one. And she also learned the basics of notes and how the violin works, and she practiced herself. Now, she's not the only one, actually. You know, 10-year-olds doing gaming things that, to be honest, I have no concept of how they do that. How does that not relate to real life? And I think that's where, for me, AI is part of that wider, as you say, authentic assessment, but to be honest, also authentic learning. And I think assessment cannot be detached from the broader learning agenda. And it's really learning, teaching, and assessment. And what does the experience look like for the learner in that way?
Where we learn and how we assess is changing, definitely. Video is perhaps the biggest disruptor, and YouTube perhaps the biggest educator in our experience. But assessment is still valued by educators and students. We go through this process to end up with that very important piece of paper at the end of the day. So coming back to you, Joe, my next question is really, we know what could be improved in assessment, and it's perhaps AI will be that trigger ultimately. But do you think that the existing, it's like I'm hearing something. Do you think that the existing assessment sort of specifications that exist within SQA and other awarding bodies are flexible enough for us to adapt our current assessment practice in the light of things like ChatGPT? Do we have all the tools we need?
So at the moment, again, you know, I think HQ is always really willing to flex. I don't think we do just now, but I don't think, again, I think Graeme explained it quite nicely. I think authentic assessment is the way ahead round all of this and changing our assessment instruments, but it probably requires a partnership between the different subjects and colleges and the SQA, and it's just a tweak of assessment that's needed to get everything right. I think the danger in the system just now, and it's the kind of Daily Mail type dilemma that basically there is a danger in the system just now that some clever students or some clever colleges or some clever journalist points out that and I'll use old speak, there's a NAB or there's some assessment out there that hasn't changed for 3 or 4 years or more or longer, even 5 or 6 years or 10 years. The AI can just eat up, and that there's a group of students just using AI and nobody's picking it up. So I think that's the risk to the whole assessment system just now. But I think it's eminently fixable, and it's that bit about colleges, and I'm talking about colleges just now, colleges stepping up, identifying where there are instruments of assessment or things that now need to be changed because of the advent of AI, and doing that in collaboration with SQA or whatever SQA's follow-up body is. I don't think there's a lack of willingness in the system. I think the actors in the system need to work together, and at the end of the day, it'll actually make assessment more authentic and actually better for learners. We've spent far too long asking boring questions and getting boring answers, and actually very little learning happening in between the boring question and the boring answer, because at the end of the day we're all about learning and getting learners to do deep learning, and for facts and things to stay and be able to be applicable, to be applied. And I think sometimes the whole system's forgotten that, and I think AI is a good reminder of why we need to change up our game round assessment. Does that answer the question, Kenji?
It does for me, or leads on to another, I suspect. But John, so we're a community, and as Graeme said, the SQA is not just a single body, and there are other awarding bodies out there. The SQA involves many educators across the country. But we're a large community, but do we have the tools we need? Are the rules in place? Is the flexibility there for us to adjust to AI?
I would agree with Joe that what you have is a specification that outlines your approach to assessment that we all work to. But in reality, SQA, in my experience, have been quite flexible about how those are interpreted. So my gut feeling, I've never heard a situation where somebody said, well, we have a creative way to assess this, but SQA said no. That, in my experience, that hasn't happened. It's not to say it won't. So I think, yes, we do have guidance on that, but I think we have awarding bodies that are reasonably flexible. But I also think we need to reflect on the fact that most of our assessments have heavy knowledge-based elements, and we need to move away from knowledge-based. You know, information is cheap now. It's finding, analysing, using, adapting, evaluating information. Those are the things we need to concentrate on. And I think the direction of travel has to be away from knowledge and information to application. And I think people who develop assessments that bring us up that level, that hierarchy, I think are doing a good job for the students. But I think that's the direction of travel that all awarding bodies need to move to further in the future, to live with AI on the basis that information and knowledge is going to be a click away. And it's what you do with it that's going to be useful.
Okay, and Graeme, so you've mentioned about the impact that AI might have on learning as well as assessment and teaching. And there is another player in the room there. AI is now the constant 24/7 access to support that students will inevitably lean on. Mm-hmm. And the awarding bodies react. Is there something more that awarding bodies need to do to react? Do we need to change what's being assessed? Does that come from you or does it come from us?
I guess that's the challenge, isn't it? We talk about, we don't want people to be taught to assessment. But actually, the narrative is the system just straight away to that. When actually, the thing that remains is never your assessment. The thing that remains is what you've learned, if we're brutally honest. When you leave college, leave university, you go to employment, you might remember some of the topics, and you certainly won't remember what the certificate said, maybe the reality. What will matter is what you actually learned that's applicable to enable you to perform successfully, succeed, collaborate with the people around you, actually adapt to the society you're in. And it's interesting that we have an education system that probably, I think, and again, this is a global, it's not just Scotland, this is a global issue. It's probably about 100 years behind where their own society is. Yeah. So the fact is that teachers, lecturers, tutors, whatever age, won't use any of that, fundamentally believe that the models that were taught and that they did at school are still fundamental, will go home and their whole house will be adapted to the use of technology, AI. They'll jump in an Uber where the Uber driver doesn't know where he's going. What happens is his app is changing him constantly to tell him where he's going because there's 4 cars queued up in the road in front of him. But yeah, I have no problem with that. They jump in a plane and most of that plane, AI's flying that plane. There might be 2 people at the front, right? But they're not with feel flying a metal tube with 300 people in it, right? The computer's doing that. And I don't know of any qualification where if you failed it, you die. But the interesting is we're comfortable at AI flying the plane. So I think for me is this concept of seeing it as some kind of opposing. I think it's, as John said, it is about that, embracing that and saying, what is it that we as humans bring? And that's the difference here, right? We're trying to compete or trying to police what's happening in technology, but we actually be saying, what are the things that we bring? We bring the relational conversation, we bring the subjective and the contextual, because the reality is that assessment for me, the whole point to mitigate this is to make assessment personal. We want to know what the learner has learned. What's the context for how they've developed? How does that work for them? And to be honest, there's very few subjects where that's not what you want to know, right? And I think part of that issue is, if I can access information and stuff general, then use AI and embrace it and then just tell everybody use AI. At least, to be honest, if you work so hard to use the AI tool effectively, deserve to pass. Because it shows you're able to use technology effectively. The question is, what do you bring? And the reality is that when you go to a job, many companies now are getting rid of qualifications on job applications. So actually, I'm not saying qualifications don't open doors, but what happens when people don't care? And actually 5 years after you left school, no one cares what you did at school, right? You probably might be, your parent or mother might be the only one who cares, right? But you don't, because actually you moved on. So I think there's some real interesting things for me about embracing technology to look at how adapting learning and assessment. And I think just finally, I think the issue for us is one of the good things that the broad education reform is doing, I think, and you could argue looking at the draft Hayward output, is actually that more implied integration between learning, teaching and assessment, where looking at assessment being for the learner, not for the system. Because the reality is, I'm not saying we treat learners like sausages, but if you were to design the system, it's probably the same as other factory would use. And I think part of that is this idea of what makes for them, how do we make an experience for them that's about learning, authentic assessment that's not end, but it's part of how to enhance their learning, I think.
We're coming to the end of our scheduled time for the slot, but we started 10 minutes late, so I'm just pushing ahead and pushing back 10 minutes. So I was going to ask a question around the fact that we've all had teaching experience. So if you were in the position today where you were still in front of a class, in front of students teaching, what would you do differently with AI now in the room? But I want to add to that, because it's been brought up a few times, is AI, the SQA, awarding bodies are a bigger community. We all involved in assessment, whether it's formatively or summatively. There have been examples now introduced where we're using AI to assess the work that we produce, whether that's the example that Michael gave earlier about giving a draft of something you've written and ask AI to criticize it, come back, can you proofread it, can you check it? There's the first pass system that's developed in England out of Bolton, Aftab and his team, who match the criteria, and as you write, you're informed if you're hitting all the points that you're meant to cover in the essay that you're writing. All of these tools. So as well as AI being there, is AI good enough where it is today to help on that assessment stage, whether it's formatively or summatively? Is it a second pair of eyes, and how well does it perform? Joe, what do you think?
Oh, I was about to. I'm busy putting comments in about it. I think the first thing we need to do, really with some urgency, is I would, and again, so I was English and communications and all these kind of subjects. I would be dazzling my students by getting in class, asking AI lots of questions, so it wrote lovely essays for me and doing all these things. So they all get in the way of using these tools. And then having got them to write AI, to write lots of essays, and us doing the critique, and encouraging students to use AI even to draft some of their work. I would be doing that deeper critique of, are the facts right? Would we express that differently? Is this in the right style? All of these things, so that what you're using AI to do is to scaffold the students' learning. That's how I would be doing things just now, but I would be doing it with some urgency, but really so that everybody gets to see these tools and can get the benefit of it, and there's not just some, a wee clique of students at the back of the room that have worked out how to use this and are getting an unfair advantage. I would make sure everybody knew how to use it. And then I pinned a thing earlier on. If they're going to use AI, also you have to show them then how to cite how they've used AI as well, so that they can use AI, but actually they say, well, actually I used AI in this way to give me the structure to the essay, or to look up a particular thing, so we can see it's their own work. But that's how I would be doing things. I'd be getting right in there and having great fun with AI with my students, and also highlighting where the AI makes crashing mistakes. I had a great laugh, and one of the things I've been asking questions, ask questions about me, and obviously Wilson is quite a I would say, popular surname rather than common surname, but popular surname. So if you put Joe Wilson in City Glasgow College, I get this amazing biography generated that told me that I'd been the principal of a couple of colleges, that I had an MBE or an OBE, and all these things. I thought, God, this is amazing. I wish that was true. But it just completely made something up. And I think the learners need to see that as well. So they just use it as another tool, not the main thing. So I'll shut up at that.
But it's not infallible. But my dad used to help me with my homework.
Yeah.
The number of things he got wrong when I took it to school the next day,
Yeah.
and that conversation. So, John, what do you think?
I think broadly, like Joe, I'd be embracing the idea that the technology is available. I'd be sharing it with the learners. But I think I would be much stronger on the health warning of how do you test the accuracy, how do you test the validity. It doesn't take long in ChatGPT to work out that it's based on American information, the whole style of it. And then when you put in issues around maths, you get a lot of creativity, shall we say. And I think the idea of encouraging them to use it to help reflect, but also make sure that they understand how to check or validate information as far as practical, because it's not clear cut and absolute, but about using different sources, about having confidence, about the persuasiveness of the material. So I think that there's a lot to learn about that. And to be fair, most of it is the same as you would teach about Wikipedia or indeed YouTube. I mean, we all go into YouTube to learn how to change our clocks on the microwave every time the clocks, but we know it works after that. But there is a lot of things on YouTube and other sources, ChatGPT being one of them, where you would want to be able to double check and have confidence in the material that's developed and be able to evaluate its worth.
Right. And Graeme,
Yes,
the last word on this then.
for the moment.
For the moment.
All right, yeah, I think if I was in front of a class, one is, I think that part of coming to that ownership issue, I think part of the issue is that as a lecturer in a college, and to be honest, in many situations, we feel we have to get someone from here to there. And there's a particular road that gets them to that route. But like Google Maps, there's many a journey. And I think for me, the AI is what provides the opportunities for those alternative journeys, I think. So one of the things I need to get my skills, and I recognize as a skills issue, that isn't about use of the product, because to be honest, in the FE sector, we've done IT training for decades, and it still hasn't transformed actual teaching learning practice, if you're honest, right? What it's done is it's just converted what we already do to maybe sometimes use it on screen. But actually the idea of how to, and that I think for me, there's some other issues around authentic assessment. What does authentic look like? And I know that if you're a lecturer, most subjects in a college, in fact, even ones that are termed academic, you're thinking, I need to find, when they leave here, I might have been fantastic. Now I've got them to do essay to essay or other models. But when they leave, they have to go and function in society. And so for me, what are the things that value function society? I was talking with David over coffee about some of the PDAs at level 8 around meta skills. Meta skills are not new. Aristotle used meta skills, and they're not 21st century, they're 4th century or 3rd century. In fact, there have always been skills that are important. We've never really valued them though. And I think for me, the thing about assessment and learning is we should be doing the things that we really are good at that really help the learner, and we should leave the other things that are good to something else or somebody else for them. And so when they come to that is, what are the things that AI can teach you? Well, it might be able to teach you structure and some of that kind of stuff and language and grammar and other things. But the reality is that we need to be functionally be able to use it. And I think for me that the challenge for staff is, how do I try and apply the subject that I know I have to teach into the context of what that learner needs leaving here? And it isn't just leaving here next week, it's the 2 or 3 years down the line, because that's when you see the value, I think, of that learning. So for me, AI has got a role. I think there'll be other tools that will come along. There already are tools. And I think the interest you talk about industry, I think you're right. I think every time you watch something on the news, you think, oh, that's AI to do all that stuff. And you just take it for granted. Now, I'm not going in a self-driving car, right? I like the idea of having a steering wheel, but I'll maybe like the kid in the back seat who used to have a seat that a steering wheel that's sucked onto the back of your driver's seat, and the kid would pretend to drive. I think that'll be us when the electric, automatic, AI-powered cars come along, right? Yeah,
They're already here.
they're already here, but they're just not on our roads. That's the important thing, right?
I do them, so I do them worldwide, and I have
Uh-huh.
a customer in Dubai, and I just turn their car into a vehicle.
Well, you see, and that's the issue, right? Is that I think part of the thing in ChatGPT is it's interesting how the first people pushing the boundaries are never the people that end up making the biggest impact. Actually, if you look at Microsoft, Apple, and some of those, there were other people that opened the doors to some of that, and they took them over, bought them over, killed them, whatever they did, right? And the thing for me, ChatGPT, there'll be other tools that will come.
Yeah.
The thing is, I think finally is, we want learners in the system to be people who are able to make judgment, be able to look at stuff and say, that's good, that's bad. Well, the reality is there's no black and white, it's all a bit grey, isn't it? So we actually want to make judgments that are subtle, that are nuanced, that are experienced. And part of the challenge for subject people is, how do I help learners develop those things? Because the world for technology, we don't know, futurists, and Joe know this, there's always been futurists tell you what the future will look like in 10 years. Who knows, right? The reality is that we want people to be prepared to whatever it is. And I think the use of AI and other tools has its place, but we then more importantly need to look for humans, for staff. What's the thing that we bring that the technology does not bring? And I think that's the challenge for curriculum, and I think it's also a challenge for deliverers as well.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, this conversation could go on, and I could bring in more. I feel the pressing urge of people wanting to ask particular questions.
Can we get the AI to maybe slow down time? Would that help? Right, okay. Put the clocks back.
That's coming next, clearly. Look, I just want to thank you for just coming along and just expressing your genuine opinions about what this space, what it means for us when AI comes into our space. But unfortunately, we do have to move on.